Welcome to my channel. If you love emotional stories, please remember to subscribe. Tom Harper woke before the alarm. 4:30 in the morning. An hour when London was only just remembering itself. When buses crawled out of the depots onto their routes, and the sky hung low like an untold secret. Tom worked at a courier warehouse in Park Royal, loading, unloading, stitching delivery schedules, responding to breakdowns and sewing them up like torn wounds. In his pocket was a thermos of strong tea. In his head, a day planned down to the minute. He was 31, and over the last 5 years he had learned to stop fatigue with a single phrase. For us. For us meant for Emily. She was from Manchester. She had come to London to finish law at King's College. Her days flowed through textbooks, lectures, damned procedural practice that clung to every detail, and endless group assignments with boys and girls whose shadows smelled of coffee and night libraries. Emily laughed quickly, spoke precisely when it came to law, and got lost in the little things of daily life. The phone appeared in Tom's hand before she asked, "Love, could you pick up the parcel? Save the washing machine? Take the letters? Pay the utilities?" He rescued. He checked timings at the warehouse to steal half an hour and nip over to her campus. He bought the cheapest meal deal at Tesco and tucked in notes. "Just eat. The dawn is yours." He converted side gigs into a currency of time for her. When she fell asleep with a textbook in her hands, he pulled up the blanket. When she woke, the tea was already steaming. They rented a small flat on the second floor above a bakery in Shepherd's Bush. The kitchen fit too if one of them breathed carefully. On the windowsill stood basil that delighted Emily for exactly a week. On the wall, a map of Britain marked with places they had never been but had promised to visit after the degree. Cornwall, the Hebrides, the Yorkshire Dales. On the fridge, yellow sticky notes with her deadlines and his shifts. 5 years is a lot. In 5 years, there are enough Mondays for a person to forget what Sunday smells like. Tom knew that smell. It came rarely, like a New Year card that every sorting office had missed, but that still arrived. Their Sundays were like the Thames embankment at Blackfriars. Sometimes sun, sometimes fish, sometimes only wind and tea in a thermos. She laughed, stubbornly poking her finger at plans. "When I pass the last exam, we'll go to the sea, Tom. I promise." He nodded and believed. Because he knew how to believe in simple things. A sky that eventually lightens, tea that eventually warms, and people who say "I promise" not to pronounce a pretty word the final semester. Emily became thinner, in movement, in sleep, in voice. The phone shone at night when she read just a little more of the statutes. Theo appeared in the group, attractive, with a careless haircut and a neat briefcase, a solicitor's son from Kent. He solved problems almost with a smile. He could buy everyone coffee and not remember whom he had paid for. Generosity came to him automatically. And he knew how to listen so that you felt as if wings were sprouting. Tom saw him once, after the library, when he brought Emily a torch and chocolate. Theo was standing nearby, leaning against a column, and his speech flowed easily, like beer at the defector's weld. Tom handed Emily the chocolate, and she smiled apologetically, as if late for an important meeting with him, and with herself. The beginning of the end wasn't loud. It came like fine rain, imperceptible and everywhere. Tom opened his laptop and saw Emily typing messages with red hearts, justifying, "It's a collab. We're a team. Don't be silly." He heard her calling at midnight and whispering in the bathroom. He caught her gaze gliding from his hands to her screen, and one day, When he returned early from his shift because the van broke down and the schedule collapsed, he opened the door quietly, as before, not to wake anyone, and saw a stranger's jacket on the chair. Keys with a university fob lay on the table, as if awaiting a verdict. Theo walked out of the kitchen with the confidence of someone taught to open any door. For a second they met eyes, and there was nothing heroic in the collision, only a cold fact. "Hi," Theo said, as if in a pub. "Hi," Tom said, and for the first time in many years the words "for us" were not anywhere inside him. Emily appeared with a towel in her hand. "Tom, don't explain," he asked. "I see, you're an adult. And so am I." He left the way you switch off the light in a room where no one reads anymore, and at night, he sat on a bench by the tube station, where a poster from around the corner stared with a happy couple who had just bought a new build in Croydon. His phone squeaked in his pocket. Apologies, panic, explanations. He stayed silent. The talk happened 2 days later. They sat in the kitchen where the basil had already turned gray. 2 cups of tea cooled on the table. Emily spoke as if she were recording court minutes. "I made a mistake. I want a divorce. I don't want to lie. I think our roads have diverged. I don't feel..." "Not feeling is the most honest thing," he answered. "I wish you to pass your exams, and to live the way you decide. We agreed that after the degree, we agreed on many things," Tom said. "And all of it makes no sense if you already live in a different life." He wasn't a saint. He thought about revenge. But revenge comes to everyone with a different face. To him, it came in the form of a calculator and contracts. The flat was in his name. He paid the deposit. He carried the rent. He signed the renewal. Their shared savings were small. His put-by pennies in a rainy day account, her bursary spent on books and coffee. He sat and calculated, honestly, firmly, without pathos. "I won't sponsor you after the divorce," he said evenly. "I can't and I won't. The tenancy is in my name. I'm breaking it. You have a month to find a place. I'm taking my things and leaving today. Take the furniture if you like, except mine. I won't demand anything from you." "You're leaving me with no money," she whispered. "I'm leaving you with what you left us with the truth." He packed 2 suitcases. None of their photographs knotted in his throat. They simply became lighter, like air before a storm. He left for Bristol, where his old friend Callum offered a room above a garage and a job in a marine freight warehouse. New logistics, new schedules, new water that no longer smelled of the Thames. Bristol greeted him with the Clifton suspension bridge and the smell of rain hanging on the edge of the docks. Tom worked as always, from bell to bell, sometimes without any bell. The sea has no schedule. On weekends he wandered the harbor side, where sails of past centuries creaked in museums and gulls begged for chips with the voices of professional actors. He didn't think much, but he thought deeply. Revenge is not an act. It is a refusal of mercy, suddenly appeared in his head, and he wondered where the voice had come from. He met Isla at 4:30 in the afternoon, when he ducked into a small cafe called Harbor and Ink by the harbor side. She was writing notes on paper bags in neat handwriting. Limitation is also a form of freedom. Her hair seemed to have its own order, for her and for her alone. She ran the cafe and a little shelf of books you could borrow for the length of a cup. She knew how to give people a space in the exact shape that suited them. "Black, strong?" Tom asked. "Black, strong, like midnight over Bristol." She smiled and set down the cup. "You're from London?" "Yeah, that obvious?" "London is in your shoulders," Isla said. "But here the geography is different. The horizon is closer, and the winds are franker." They talked about books he hadn't had time to read, because tiredness kept becoming a bookmark. About ships that leave furrows on the water. About work people don't complain about because it keeps the world together. He came every day. First for coffee, then for her voice that made days warmer. In a month he already knew that Isla loved the Silmarillion but didn't say it out loud. That she despised pretentious avocado toast, though sometimes her toast turned out wonderful. And that she didn't ask about the past if she wasn't ready to hear the answers. Meanwhile, Emily was taking her exams. She moved to a friend's in Lewisham, where the windows look out on a yard with a blue plastic paddling pool that is always empty. Theo disappeared as naturally as he had appeared, explaining, "I'm not ready for anything serious. I need to think about a traineeship." She was left with textbooks, silence, and a cold kitchen. It was so lonely that for the first time in years she dialed Tom's number, not from the missed calls list. "How are you?" she asked. "Working," he replied. "I passed admin law." "And criminal? Congratulations," Tom said. "I was foolish," she sighed. "I thought the whole world shines like campus halls. I was wrong about it. About myself, about us. I want to talk." Tom was silent, and the truth was cold again, like water. He tried to find in himself the anger that gives you the strength to move. Instead, he found only balance. What happened had happened. He knew. If he returned, he would return neither to that girl nor to that version of himself. They were both different. "I'm glad you're passing your exams," he said. "As for talking, we've already said everything." Isla didn't ask whom he had been speaking to. She set down in front of him a chocolate cupcake she called "a cupcake for those learning to let go," and simply sat beside him. "You know, at sea there's a phrase, the returning wave. That's when one wave seems like the last, but another follows. Not against you, but by the law of motion. Don't confuse it with a calling." In Bristol, autumn smelled of kombucha and wet leaves. Tom settled into the room above the garage. Old festival posters, a table with scratches, 2 shelves for books that he now read. He brought to Harbor and Ink bags from the local market. Tomatoes, apples laid out as if they had just slid off a still life. Isla ran her finger along an apple's skin and said, "They smell like conversation." The romance didn't start like fireworks. It began when Tom brought Isla an old book, Bristol Ship Stories, and they read it aloud after closing. When, one evening, the power went out and they made tea on a camping stove and laughed like children hiding under a table during a storm. When Isla came to his warehouse with a big thermos of soup after his shift had been wound to midnight and the wind rattled the doors, and when one morning Tom, having stopped looking for messages from the past on his phone, was the first to dial her. "Would you mind walking to Clifton Bridge and back? I want to show you how morning can look like a chance." Meanwhile, Emily got a trainee position at a small law firm in Stratford. The pay was minimal, the hours maximal. She weighed every pound, hunted supermarket discounts for the first time, learned to cook soups for $3 a week. Her pride cracked, like ice in a glass. She wrote to Tom a second time. "I understand I was unfair. I want to make amends for what I broke. May I come to Bristol? Just to talk." Tom stared at the screen for a long time before replying. He walked out to the waterfront, where water always says what must be said. He wrote, "Come Sunday." They met on the south bank. Emily stood in a coat that no longer remembered her shoulders. She looked younger and older at the same time. She looked at him, and understood that he was different. And also, that beside him walked a woman with a soft light in her eyes, and her hand lay in his as naturally as water takes the shape of the shore. "Hi," Emily said. "Hi," Tom replied. "This is Isla." "Nice to meet you," Isla said, offering her hand. Her voice contained no victory, only choice. They sat in a cafe whose windows brought the water closer. They talked about small things, and then Emily said the main thing. "Tom, I want to come back. I know how it sounds. I know what I did. I've learnt what it means to be without you, without your attention, without our for us. I think we can start from zero. I'm different. I understand." Tom listened. He thought about how he had measured his life in recent years, from the alarm to the last cup of tea. How he had chosen for us instead of for me, and did not regret it, because love gives the right to be generous. But generosity does not oblige you to be a fool. He said quietly, using the old home name. "I'm glad you've understood something. That matters, but I have a different life. Not better, not worse, mine. I love her. I love us. I'm not going back. And I'm not punishing you. I'm simply no longer your shore." Emily nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't become stronger or weaker. She became more truthful than before, and that truth hurt. She left, wishing them well, as sincerely as she could. Spring in Bristol came suddenly. Cafe windows opened, the waterfront filled with bicycles, and the light became so clear that thoughts inside it seemed lit from within. Tom and Isla rented a small house in Bishopston, with a garden that held one bench and 2 dreams. On the wall above the table hung a list of places once marked on Tom's map, now without obligation, simply as a collection of wishes. Cornwall, the Hebrides, the Yorkshire Dales. They talked not about when, but about how we'd like. Tom proposed in the least serious way possible. On the Clifton Bridge, where a lone violinist played and passers-by stopped to give a minute and a coin, he held out a small box and asked as if he were inviting her to stay 10 minutes after coffee. "With me? Further?" Isla laughed through a tear and nodded. "With you, further." The wedding was small, a few friends. Callum, who put on a suit for the first time of his own accord, the violinist who found his way to them alone, and a cake that melted faster than the courtyard whispers. They exchanged words so softly that only the water heard. Emily found out from social media. The photo was simple. The 2 of them on the grass, water behind them, a sky easy to believe in. She closed the laptop and sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then she stood, brewed tea, and wrote the first letter in years. Not to Tom, to herself. "I didn't just betray him. I betrayed our for us, without understanding that it equals my for myself. I thought love was a service for my ambitions. In truth, love is what you prepare every day for 2. Even if only one person eats because the other is on the road. I lost because I thought there had to be a better place than the one where I am loved. There isn't. There is only another." She didn't send that letter to anyone, but from it something new began. She arranged to volunteer at a legal clinic that helped people with debts. For the first time, she truly listened not to reply, but to understand. And once a month she put aside £5 in a jar labeled "For Us," not yet knowing who the us would be, but for the first time knowing why. Tom and Isla went to Cornwall in the autumn. The wind spoke in their voices, simple, honest, without promises bigger than they were. They stood on a cliff and watched the surf break down the invisible walls people erect inside themselves, and they laughed because they were alive. In the evening, they opened a bottle of cider and wrote on a napkin 3 lines that could be anything. A vow, a manifesto, a recipe for happiness. To work, not as escape, but for the embrace after the shift. To love, not for the perfect, but for the real. To choose, not out of revenge, but out of mercy. Life did not become simpler. Shift still rang at 4:30. Coffee was sometimes bitter. Bristol rain does not consult forecasts. But Tom no longer felt the knot inside. He knew. Each day has room for us, if you yourself put it there. And when sometimes at night messages arrive from unknown numbers, you probably won't read this, but he always replied the same. Take care. It was neither revenge nor excuse. It was a boundary drawn not across someone else's heart, but across his own. One day off, they returned to London. They walked through Shepherd's Bush, where above the bakery someone else was drying basil on the windowsill. For a moment, Tom stopped. He felt not pain, gratitude, because every road has starts that are not obliged to be finishes. Want to go up? Isla asked. No, he smiled. I want tea. And your story about how a lemon is the sun in a cup. They went into a random cafe. On the wall hung a poster. Real things don't change fast. Tom thought that this is not always true. Sometimes real things do change fast, like people who have learned how to be real. At night, falling asleep next to a woman who did not demand heroism from him and did not promise the impossible, he thought what had come to him in Bristol when the sea smelled of iron. Revenge is only the shadow of justice that has lost its light. He chose the light, and it turned out it had always been within reach, in a thermos of tea and the reliability of his own hands, in the word further that takes nothing away but gives meaning. Somewhere in Lewisham, Emily was making soup for 3 days and writing notes for a client with debts. She stopped looking for mirrors in other people's eyes, and for the first time in a long time, wrote to a single addressee, her future self. I will find my for us. It begins with me. Meanwhile, Britain kept waking every day at 4:30. Buses left the depots, and the sky, as always, pretended it was learning to brighten only today. And perhaps this is the greatest intrigue of life, that darkness is stubbornly unable to win. It only knows how to remind us that light becomes visible when you switch it on.